Thanks everybody for joining tonight. This is the last installment of this webinar series on factors affecting cow repro, and we're really happy to have John Popp on tonight. Excuse me. I've been lucky to know John for several years. He did 13 years with Maffrey, where we worked together, and even though I was an insufferable 23-year-old when I started, he somehow tolerated me and has been a great mentor for many years. I can see John's face. He's giving very funny eyebrows to me right now. So 13 years with Maffrey, an excellent resource while he was there. 5 years of research in Kamloops and Lethbridge, where he published quite a few extension pieces and lots of peer-reviewed journal articles. He got his degree and PhD at U of S. Excuse me. He runs a cow calf operation with around 270 cows, and he says now we've cut back to allow for Mexico. So they did just enjoy a very nice looking vacation. He does nutrition consulting and has a genetics company to introduce dual purpose fleck fee to North American dairy industry, and that's Big Bear Genetics. His wife Adele, in his notes, is a superhero and smarter than all of us, and I can confirm. His son Victor is a mechanical engineer at Elmer's Manufacturing, and his daughter Hannah is a 2024 U of S agro grad. He still loves cows, and his passion is genetics and understanding bovine longevity. And I think you should probably add rope horses to that, John. Yeah, nice horse flesh. And with that, I'll hand it over to John.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody having me, and I owe some of these people to bring me back out of some of my time of retirement away from doing extension work. I'm going to attempt to give you a little bit of an insight on all the things that we have to measure with regard to reproduction on our cattle herd, and how those parameters will affect production and also economic parameters. I think the lead-off message that I will give everybody is I'm going to tell you that the most important thing in managing a cow herd, despite of what everybody may think, is actually reproduction. And secondary to that, we can talk about production, we can talk about how big our calves are, what our weaning weights are, and all of those things. But at the end of the day, if your cow herd fails to get pregnant, it's extremely difficult to maintain a high level of profitability. And we often hear about the gold standard of, if we can wean 90% live calves from the number of cows exposed, then we've literally hit the gold standard. And I don't number myself as one of those farmers that can do that. Economically speaking, it's doable, but it requires a huge amount of input. And the question really then becomes, is it worth doing that? And I'm going to say it isn't, but I'm not a coffee row guy. I've never been a coffee row guy, but you'll never see me go to the coffee row and say, oh yeah, I've got a 90% live wean rate and we're pulling 600-pound steers, because we have to talk actual real numbers and reality. We can't talk about a bunch of stuff that's not true, because at the end of the day, we are accountable to ourselves, and we're accountable to what our cow herd will do. And it's as simple as that. And I really couldn't care, where we sit, but there are things that we have to do in order to manage our cow herd through some of the aspects of reproduction, as well as the management that we impart on them. So, and a lot of this I'm going to draw even from personal experience. If you ask me, up until about 2017, if you ask me, do we have a problem with reproduction? I can't remember the last time that we had reproductive problems. We ran, for the majority of all the years that we ranched, we ran our bulls with the cows for 65 days. We ran the heifers at 65 days. When we first started out, we bred the heifers about 2 weeks before the cows. And then I just said, you know what, I don't want to calve cows longer. So we just bred the cows the same time as the heifers. We calved everybody. and our preg rates typically ran 94%. So that was it. And I never thought reproduction was an issue. If we wanted to calve out 200 cows, we would put 220 cows out to breed, and the next year we'd be calving 200 cows. It was that simple. And then the drier years started in 17, 18, 19, 2020 was a little better, and 2021 was very, very dry again. And we did what I thought were all the right things. We responded to the drier years, the signal that Mother Nature came or told us it's going to be drier. We destocked our cows because that's something we have to do in order to try to maintain a reasonable level of production and not destroy our ground, so that we would not overgraze. We would still allow our forages to recover and still try to keep the cows in, reasonable body condition. And I emphasize a couple of things here. I talk about the importance of a cow body condition and the cow's ability or failure to rebreed. And the suggestion is always, if we're using an American scoring system of 1 to 9, 9 meaning an extremely obese cow, and 1 meaning you don't want to see her because she's on death's doorstep. We would like to see our cows at a body score of about a 5, which would be a 2.5 on the Canadian scale. And we want to see the heifers at a body score 3. So we do want the heifers in a little bit better shape. And when we go back to my years at the University of Saskatchewan and all the things that we learn and read, it's like, okay, well, you should breed your heifers, and then you should calve your heifers separately, and you should run your bred heifers away from your cows, and even your 2s coming 3s should be on a rising plane of nutrition. And those are all the things that we're taught and that we should be doing, and those are things that we can do. But I found over all the years, the 20 years of ranching, until we started running into reproductive problems, and I'm going to focus on our own problems here, which is best, because then everybody else is going to feel good and say, well, you know what, that guy's got issues too. So it's best to pick on yourself so that we can get better. So what we do is we try to manage and we try to come up with strategies to accomplish our goals. And then the other thing we can do that I've told lots of people, I said, well, you know what, I don't necessarily care whether or not a 2-year-old winters with a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old with your mature cows. But the bottom line is, if you got one that's getting thin, and then you should take that animal and pull it out of your average maintenance group. And I remember, this is 22 years ago, we took a trip out to Alberta to see a gentleman by the name of Wyatt Swanson. Some of you guys might remember him. Many of you will not, but Wyatt was an intensive alfalfa grazier, and he ran about 1,000 head of cows. And he says, we just winter our cows all in a group. Somebody gets thin, we just pull out the thins, but everybody gets this diet, and we feed to maintain body condition, and that's what we do. And the reason that you see this slide before everything else I'm going to talk about is everyone says, oh, you got to feed chelated mineral, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. Well, if your body condition of your cows is not at a reasonable level, then you will strain the system, okay? And I'm going to pick on John here. In 2021 was a classic example where calves were at or below cost of production. Of course, the people in town will say, what, you got $1,200 for your calves, you're getting lots of money. It's like, no, the calves were at or below cost of production. It was extremely dry. There was no feed to be had anywhere, and feed was 10 cents a pound. So we ourselves, as well as everybody else, were faced with a decision. Well, the calves aren't going to bring the income to do this. Do I go out and purchase a bunch of 10-cent hay or grain or something? But reality is, the cost of that additional energy that we were going to put in front of our cows was going to come at a cost of 10 cents per pound. If it was going to be something that was of reasonable quality, that is what it was going to cost us. So just for the sake of quick math, if we add another 10 pounds to our diet, we add another $1 a day, which over the course of the winter is another $200. and we got already a calf that we're losing money on. So now we're going to throw another $200 after our cows. Well, guess what John decided? Not going to spend the money. The cows are going to eat more grass store. They're going to eat more straw. And we're just going to run them a little tougher. And they're not going to come out of the winter hurting too badly. And we're going to be all right. And we're going to rely on our grass and the fact that we've had good management. We do a good job on our grass, and we're going to get through this. So that was the thought. That's what we did. Okay, and I'm going to explain to you what actually happened on the reproductive side, but I'm not going to get to that now, but rather I'm going to get to that later. So the one thing I'm going to say to anyone and everyone is, and I've had lots of people tell me this, they're like, and this relates to 2021 and it relates to anything that we see in management. But I will say this, there is no pride in late season grazing. If the cows are losing weight in the process of grazing late in the season, then I don't care. Don't brag to me if your cows are losing weight, they're going into the winter thin and then eventually fail on reproduction. Then the little blip that I have here on the left that said you're expressing pride to me about late season grazing, I honestly don't care because you're going to lose money. If you understand late season grazing, you're doing something to protein supplement your cows, you're doing something to uphold the body condition of the cows, you're pulling the calves off, you're creep feeding the calves, you're doing something to preserve and run that grazing season, but you're holding your cow's body condition, then I'm okay with you bragging about a late grazing season. But I'm not okay with it if you sheep the living daylights out of your pasture. You're destroying what you're going to possibly have in the coming year, and you're entering the winter with a thin cow. So to really to talk about that is we have to understand protein nutrition, and we have to understand energy nutrition, and I'm going to get to that slide. And we also have to understand that the actual amount of energy and protein that we get into our cow per day is all that actually matters. Okay, so let's say you're grazing low quality pasture in the fall. I'm going to say that stuff is probably 6% protein. And because it's 6% protein and the cow is lactating, she has a calf outside. The cow's physical ability to consume that quality of feed now is only going to allow her to consume approximately 2.3% of her body weight. Now, in order to maintain that cow and to maintain the whole process and keep things together, she needs to consume about 2.7% of her body weight of that quality of feed. Okay, and there's a very simple way to actually accomplish that is by simply balancing her protein nutrition profile. So if you did something as simple as rolling out a second cut high quality alfalfa bale at a rate of approximately 4 pounds per cow per day, or you roll it out to provide 12 pounds in one slug feeding and you only do it every 3 days, then you've allowed the rumen to remain functional and the cow can go out and she can graze some of that crappy feed. Okay, and she will hold her condition. So, and that's the bottom line. You can tell me, you know what, I grazed my cows till Christmas. I'm like, awesome. What do they look like? Let's go take a drive. Well, you better not be embarrassed to go show them to me, right? Okay, so what I've done here is, again, and that it's so important that I emphasize this because you need to understand the nutrition part before you start running after all the fancy goodies that the feed companies are going to give you, the lick tubs, the you name it, right? We're going to do the basic math first. So the very basic first math that you're going to do is for a cow to gain some weight, she requires a dietary energy of 58 to 60% TDN, and I'm keeping it simple. We're going to use energy. We're not going to use net energy for maintenance, net energy for gain, or net energy for lactation, but we're just going to use energy, and we're going to talk protein. And we're going to say she requires about 8%. She can still gain some weight on that. If it's a young growing animal, we need 12 to 12.5%. But a cow, even at 8%, can put on some muscle and she can put on a weight. So if the cow weighs 1,400 pounds, she can consume 2.7% of her body weight, okay, at that. So that's actually 37.8 pounds of dry matter or 3 pounds of actual protein and 21 pounds of energy. Now you got to ask me, well, how do I come up with that number? Well, I took the cow's ability to consume the feed, which is 37.8 pounds, and I multiplied it by 0.08, and that gave me 3 pounds of protein. And I did the same thing to get my energy number. So now you can provide that 3 pounds of protein by giving the cow, let's say we're going to use 20% protein alfalfa hay. Okay, that means if it's 20% protein, we want to give her 3 pounds. We go 3 divided by 0.2, and that's going to give you the amount of pounds of hay that that cow needs to eat in order to meet her total protein requirement. The rest of what she eats can be straw, I don't care, but we need that much in order to keep the rumen functioning, for the cow to intake her feed, and for everything to work. Okay, on this diet, she's gaining weight. And prepartum nutrition, I said to another guy today, prepartum nutrition is more important than anything you can do after the cow has had her calf. Always remember that. More important what you do before she calves than after she's had her calf. Because the reality is she can't trust you before she has a calf with the nutrition you're giving her. She's going to biologically program herself not to trust you after she's dropped her calf. Okay? The next thing, very, very important, is a thin cow is more expensive to feed through the winter versus the cow that enters the winter in good body condition. Okay? It's literally like you either wearing a jacket and going outside today or not wearing a jacket. Who wants to go outside with a t-shirt right now? I know it's pretty cold in Saskatoon, but the bottom line is if there is no insulation from cover for the cow, it's harder for her to stay warm, and the amount of feed that she requires to winter is actually higher than if she's in good body condition coming into the winter. And I remember when we went, again, this is jumping back to Wyatt Swanson from way back. He grazed alfalfa, a lot of alfalfa in the summer, and I remember seeing his cows in November when we were out there, and the cows were just fat as pigs. He says, that's my desired thing. And he says, I actually slide my cow's body condition down in the winter. I let my cows deliberately lose some weight because it's cheaper to feed them that way. And then about a month before they calve, I ramp the feed back up to them. So he was actually using the body weight of the cow to reduce his cost of production. Very effective. We did it for years until 2021 came. That one was a bit of a bad year for us, and I'm going to share some of the numbers of what happened to us as a result. The next thing that I've written here is very important as well. Wind. The effect of wind is significantly greater to give a loss of energy for the cow than temperature. A cow doesn't care if it's minus 30, but when it's minus 30 and the wind is blowing at 30 clicks, that's a recipe for disaster. And you can literally, if you ran a cow bites program or anything like that, you can literally make a cow lose 50 pounds a day in extreme cold stress. She'll lose 50 pounds a day if she's standing in the wind and she has no feed. So when those events happen where it's extremely cold, the cows need some form of shelter, or when they display, a lot of times they'll displace themselves from the open ground from feeding. And if they do have some shelter, we got to try and get them to the shelter, or we need to change our management. So there's nothing wrong with feeding cows out in the open. But when those bad days come, then we've got to have a place maybe where we don't have them out in the open, because they can lose a lot of weight. And even that's not an issue as long as you have the feed in front of them. But if they have no feed in front of them, then it can become an issue. Okay, so here's a couple of pictures of some cows at our place in the springtime. The girl on the right is in the correct body condition for calving time. She is she's gonna have her 4th calf. Everything I see on that cow, I'm super happy. The cow on the left is a cow that has just dropped her 2nd calf. And they are going to look a little thinner post calving, but the cow on the left, with regard to body condition, we would also almost consider borderline, and she would be a body score just under that 5 mark or under that 2.5 mark. We don't, I don't know if you got, oh yeah, I can see, we don't see any prominence of the rib here, and she's going to be more empty because she has calved just a little while back. But thinking in our mind, oh, look, there's a little bit of green here, and look what these cows are eating. The reality, again, we're fooling ourselves, and we're trying to feed a little bit of straw in the spring, and we've got some stockpiled grass. But the reality is, this cow here is potentially an animal that could give me trouble. Whereas this girl over here, we're pretty happy with status quo, or what we're seeing at the time. And again, we can argue she's black or she's a Simmental or whichever. It really, that part doesn't matter to me so much, other than the fact that I am going to talk about the style and the type of cow and the desirable types versus the non-desirable types. The cow on the left is not as wide in her stance in the front versus the cow on the right. So the red cow, I don't like her as much as the cow on the right. Okay. So now we talk about phenotype and function, and yeah, believe it or not, she's laying down because she got so tired of her calves nursing on her, but they're still nursing on her, and she's laying down. So we got the picture. And that cow got pregnant. She had a set of twins, and she got pregnant. Probably the only reason is because she used to lay down to let her calves nurse so she'd get a break from them. So now let's talk about phenotype and function. And the reason I emphasize this, because every farm and every operation is unique. And that's important to say that, because the cows that are fertile on your farm, I guarantee you, have common characteristics. Okay, they have common characteristics. If you tell me that all your fertile cows that live to have 10 calves are tight gutted and tube shaped and tight in the chest, I'll be like, that's amazing, because I don't believe you. But I will expect that those cows are going to be very open ribbed. They're going to be very deep chested cows. They're going to be very open in the front end, and they're going to be moderate frame cows. But go out and find the most fertile cows on your farm. Take a very, very close look at that style of cow. Look at her very closely. That's very important for your own farming operation, because those cows are going to look somewhat unique for your environment. Get a really good angle of what they look like in terms of their functional characteristics and their body style. And it's I kind of got a hidden gem cow in the background here. This cow here with the, fortunately the calf's head is in the way, but that doesn't matter. The reality is the cows are probably going to look something like this one in the background. She might not be as big as that one. She might be black, she might be purple, she might be gray. I really don't care, but she will have a certain shape and type to her. She's going to have a very wide muzzle. She's going to have a more feminine, refined head. She's probably going to weigh between that 13 and 1400 pounds. Some guys say, no, I got to have 1200-pound cows that wean 800-pound calves. Let's be realistic. That's not realistic unless they're weaning 800-pound calves at and you're pulling them off at 12 months of age. But the reality is, the only one we're fooling when we tell those kinds of stories is ourselves and nobody else. What does the cow look like? Her type? Guaranteed she's, I got a typo here. I'm sorry. She's open chested. She has a deep body, not a dip body. That was autocorrect. I swear. Nobody's laughing because I can't see anybody. She has a deep body. She has a large rumen, and she has a longer refined neck. Okay. She has a large rumen. I'm going to keep emphasizing she has a large rumen. The bigger the stove, the more garbage we can put into it, and the cow will eat it. Incidentally, cows are a beef cow is very intelligent, that when it gets cold, she just puts her feed through her system more quickly. That's what she does. That's her first response by nature. When it gets brutally cold, they eat more. And they also put it through their rumen more quickly, and they only harvest the best material, and the rest of it goes overboard. It's nature's adaptation to cold weather. That's how they can survive. Udders are probably clean and tight, and some, well, I'm not going to worry about my udder. Well, the reality, you kind of have to. If the udder is nice and clean, that allows the cow to live very long. And everything I've done in my 25 years of having cows is I've always tried to identify things that make my cows live for a very long time. And I've identified those characteristics in the beef industry as well as the dairy industry. And you will be shocked to believe that a dairy cow that lives for a very long time looks exactly like a beef cow that lives for a very long time. And she'll look the same on my farm as she will on Melissa's farm, as she will on everybody else's farm. Those cows all look the same. I guarantee it. I look at over 10,000 head of cows a year. They all look the same. Their tail is going to be low, and it's going to be between their pins in the back end. And so if you look at the cow's tail and you look at her pins at the back end, you're going to find the tail sits low. It doesn't sit up high. You will find that her hook, the length of her hook to pin is usually long, and you will find that there will be a slope downwards. The hooks are going to be higher than the pins. Thurl placement, this is more of a fancy dairy term. Basically, it refers to where the back leg sits relative to the pelvis of the cow. We look at that cow in the background here. So there's my hook, there's my pin. The leg is going to land exactly in the center of hook to pin. Okay, that's what we refer to as thurl placement. If the thurl or the leg is behind the hook and the pin, if it's at the back 1/3, you're going to see pelvic inversion. You're going to see a cow that will not be fertile. You're going to see a cow that will have problems developing with her hip. And I'm going to show you, I think I got a picture of one of my cows where her thurls are too far back. And when those cows get old, you'll see their tail head will begin to elevate, and you will see their spine weakened, and they'll hollow out in their spine, and they'll become hollow behind their shoulder. Okay, that's what happens. Trust me. Leg angles. The cow has a lot of spring in the leg, and it's actually interesting. I went and looked at a horse today on my way up here, and the back leg set on that horse, he had incredibly good spring of leg. And it's like, you see that, it's like, wow, it's the same in cattle as it is in horses. But there's a spring in the leg, and it's got a good angle. It's not posty, it's not straight. Neck and head, a blocky masculine head is an indication of an infertile animal. If it looks like a sheet of paper, you don't want her. It's got to look like a V. And a dairy geneticist from Europe used to always say to me, or he told me many years, said to me, a cow should be shaped like a V. When you look at her from the top, from the front to the back, she should be shaped like a V. When you look at a cow from the front of her nose down to the back of her legs, she should be shaped like a V. If she's shaped like that, she will be more productive. She's characterized by a more feminine, a lot of that characteristic. And the cow, most importantly, has, and you find when those cows are deep ribbed and deep rumen type cows, they have the ability to maintain body condition while at the same time producing milk. And if she's shaped like a pencil, she probably can't do it. She cannot produce milk and maintain body condition. She can do one or the other, but she can't do both. Okay. There's a saying in German for a cow. It says, die Kuh schaut wurstig aus. And what that means is the cow looks like a sausage. If the cow looks like a sausage, you don't want her. She's got to be shaped like a pear. Okay, so that's my phenotypic evaluation of the things that we see. And the next thing I'm going to say is calf weaning weights. You bet your biggest ones aren't your best ones. It's like, you want to strive for the big ones, but the reality is they're outliers, and they are not the ones that contribute to long-term function. Like in the spring sometimes, because we do run a lot of fleck fee as well, you get a bull calf born that's 110 pounds, and he's going to be an absolute bruiser in the fall. He's going to weigh 700 at 6 months of age. And I look at the cow, I'm like, I sure hope you can get pregnant, because the milk is there and everything else is there, but that's a lot of calf to raise. So, okay, so now the next thing is, Everyone's like, well, what about mineral? What about this? What all the other speakers talked about? But the purpose of what I'm doing is I'm going to try and really focus you or make you think about the other things about what you need to manage on your farm. So now let's talk about the heifers that you keep on your farm. The heifers that you keep on your farm should be the calves that are middle to lower body size at weaning. They should be the lower frame size animals, and they should be from fertile, moderate framed mothers. And guess what? You can actually make that decision at birth. And so many people don't. Some people do. I've learned that from again from another dairy farmer in Germany. He says, "Well, what do you do when you pick your heifers?" He says, "Well, I look at the heifer, I lift up her legs, I look at her udder, and I look at the cow. And if I see anything wrong with those three things in the process, I am not going to keep her as a cow." So what we've chosen to do is we do the same thing. The heifer calf is born. We lift its leg up. We look at the udder. We look at the cow's udder. And we put a tag in the calf's ear, and we knock a little triangle out of the corner of the ear tag, and that heifer could potentially become a replacement. She doesn't have to, but those three things that I see are marked on the ear tag. I don't care if you put a mark, if you put a line on your ear tag, if you put a little knife cut in the corner of the ear of the calf, cut a little slit, but those are the heifers that you identify as birth as something that everything's right with respect to the mother and the calf. So then in the fall, when we're weaning and it's like, oh, look at that nice heifer calf. It's like, no, there's a reason why she doesn't have a notch. And I can sort those heifers out, and I guarantee you, when you look under them, you'll see a sloppy udder or you'll see a teeth the size of my thumb already. So chances are those aren't going to be good uddered cows. So that's why they were cut in the first place. Now that's my farm. Some guys, every heifer on their farm has a perfect udder. Good for you. I don't seem to be able to do that. So I try to find the best cows, and I try to find my heifers at birth, and then I do another cut when it's springtime, and it's like, no, you grew too big, no, you grew too small, no, you got an ugly head. Adele doesn't like you because you took the grain paler away or whatever, but there's a reason, right? And the most important thing that we have to avoid is, I'm sure lots of you are familiar, you've heard the term called frame creep. Basically, what that means is if you keep your biggest heifers and your prettiest heifers every year, and you do that over the course of 10 years, every year the mature size of your cow will increase by 15 to 20 pounds. Lo and behold, after about 8 to 9 years, all of a sudden, your mature cows weigh too much, they're too heavy, and they have outgrown the environment in which they can function. And what has happened is you've created what we call frame creep. So then the next guy comes in, wow, we need to have all frame score 4 cows and all this stuff. There's an optimum frame size for your farm, and everybody's different. I don't want to get into the argument that a 1,200 pound cow is better than a 1,800 pound cow. I don't want to go there because I've seen productive cows within each weight category. But if an 1,800 pound cow comes home with a 500 pound calf, she should not be on your farm. Okay, we'll just leave it at that. Okay, so now, winter 2021, we need to cut costs. John needed to cut costs just like everybody else needed to cut costs. We drove to Strathclair to make a bunch of grass straw bales. We went, we drove an hour from home. We went everywhere you could possibly go to try and get feed, and it was quite a summer. Definitely quite a summer. We managed what we thought was enough feed, and we tested some of it. We thought, well, you know what, we're going to be all right, and we tried to do the best we can with the knowledge that we had. Our cows came home pretty decent body condition, so we decided we're going to feed about a third of our diet's going to be straw, 2/3 is going to be decent quality hay. Obviously, greater tonnage feeds are going to cost us less money per pound. On our farm, we bale graze. We don't want to argue about whether or not that's cheaper or more expensive, whether it's waste of feed or not waste of feed. It's whatever works for a specific farm. That's the beautiful thing about being ranchers, is we get to do what we want to do. And I've been I've been criticized about how I do things and why I do them. But the reality is I do them because I get to be my own boss as a farmer, so I choose to do what I do. I can tell you that this year, um, about the 12th of January, we had 90 head of elk come into our bale grazing. And you want to see destruction in a very, very short order, it makes you question bale grazing in a big way. And I'm not sure if I would ever want to do it again with what we saw this year. So I have to reevaluate. Over the years, we've justified doing it because in the wintertime, I go out and I do some other work and we blended hay with straw and we've been able to make it work well. Other farmers graze corn, other farmers do swath grazing, silage, mixed feeds, you name it. There's a million different ways to skin the proverbial cat or dog or calf in the spring when we're trying to graft it. But the bottom line is it has to work for you, and you have to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And if somebody questions you and you can give me an answer, my situation or anybody else, if you give me an answer why you do it, I'm good with it. If you tell me because your dad's done it and your grandfather's done it like that forever, then I'm not going to buy it. It's like, no, I want you to think about why you're doing what you're doing, right? When I look at that straw bale stack that I have on my slide, in my environment where I live, where there's a lot of rain, I would never store straw that way unless I knew I was going to feed it all that winter. But I personally would never store straw that way in our environment, right? That's not to say that it doesn't work somewhere else. It's just not something that I would do, right? So that's just an example. Okay, so well, we're going to talk about my farm. We're going to talk about some other farms, and we're going to talk about um, all the different things that people have seen. And I just called it, and Melissa really liked this slide. I said, now you're in a pickle. Okay. And the pickle occurred the fall of 2022. We go to do the preg test like we have all these years, and the vet comes out. He says, these are open. This one's open. This one's open. I'm like, I don't think this vet knows what he's doing because I've never seen so many of my cows be open, but we had a very, very high open rate. And so then it's like, okay, we've got a preg test rec. So that's what we call it. It's like, oh my, here we are. We have a preg test rec. All the other years, I'd always tell people, we got to do this, we got to do that to fix your preg test. But here's me, and I had a poor preg test. And I was like, what did I do, and what am I doing to fix it? Because I have not fully fixed it yet. It'll take 2 years to fix it. I'm hoping, right? I don't know that yet. So what I did is on the peg test, I classified my animals. I looked at the young animals. So these are my twos coming threes. Those are the hardest cows to get pregnant. The heifer that's had her first calf, and she wants to get pregnant and with her second calf. So granted, that spring, our first calvers were thin. I remember a lot of them being thin. Yeah, they calved in early and everything else. They were thin and they went to good pasture, but I'm like, okay, there's a reason why these animals were open. They're young, they're nutritionally compromised. The second group of animals that we saw a very high open rate on were the cows that were 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. So again, these were cows, weaker, more nutritionally compromised cows. So very obvious. So then once I looked through that, I'm like, all right, there's a logical reason, there's an explanation. This clearly relates mostly to body condition as well as mineral nutrition, possibly water as well, but it's not scattered throughout the entire herd. It's the outliers, it's the old cows, it's the young cows. So that would usually point to body condition. It does not point to another wreck like Vibrio, Trick, Neospora, you name it, right? So then we look at, okay, how did our calving season go? We go frantically going through the calving books. Okay, so the cows that were open, were they the cows that calved late or were they cows that calved early? Okay, if they're mostly the cows that were calved late and they were young and they were thin, then okay, it makes sense. So we need to improve on this particular group of animals. Again, logical and explanation. Really scary if it's your 4s, 5s, 6, and 7 years old, the cows that are mature, they're in good body condition. If those cows are open, that's like, oh, Now what do we do, right? Because now we're scattered throughout. There's something bigger going on than just simply body condition, which is why I stress body condition at the very start of my talk, because we got to get that part right. So now if we don't have the issue there, now we start into looking at all kinds of things. But you know what? You can't go and see black ghosts everywhere, but you just methodically have to go through every single problem that you may possibly have on your farm. And there's a lot of them. So the first one is you could have vibriosis. You could have Trichomonas foetus on your breeding bull. You could have a ton of coyotes running around, and you could have a bunch of neospora that's circulating, which would cause early embryonic mortality or abortions. Okay, so those are things that your veterinarian will talk to you about, and I'm not going to get into the detail of every one of them, but there's three that you've got to eliminate or cross off. So what I'm doing here is with every one of these points is I'm asking you to cross off. It's a checklist. Next thing, vaccination protocol. What are we using? What are we administering for a vaccine? Are we using a vaccine that has very good titers? Are we using a modified live or a killed vaccine for IBR BVD? Okay. Why am I talking about that? Well, because if we have an issue with an underlying issue with IBR, we can have a reduction in reproductive rate on our cow herd. Again, that's your veterinarian. That's not me. I'm not a veterinarian, right? The next one is mineral. What's your formulation? How much are you feeding? So that point ends right here. So what's your formulation? I'm going to address a few tags. What's your mineral? I used to be of the school of thought that, well, it's pretty simple. 30 days before we put our cows into the calving field, or we start calving our cows, we pour the mineral to them until the day that we pull the bulls, and then we go to a lower quality mineral. And me, culprit John, trying to do things for lower cost of production, I'm like, you know what? In the winter months, we can just feed trace mineralized salt, and we'll give them the odd bag of mineral, and that's good enough, and we'll just load them up pre-calving. I'm revisiting that this winter, and we're going to feed more mineral than we did in the past. I worked with a very good mineral for years and years that, sorry, whoopsie, getting ahead of myself here. Oh, there we go. I worked with a very good quality mineral that I got out of Wisconsin because I did a nutrition work with a company down there. They used a polysaccharide chelate. The stuff was expensive. It was about $50 a bag, but it was absolutely phenomenal. The repro on our cows was outstanding. The way they calved cows out was great. But then the dollar went to $1.35, and it was too expensive. So then we switched to something different. And I'm going to address minerals a little bit more. The next thing is going to be feed. So everybody puts up their feed differently. You know, we've got some slew hay, we've got some good quality hay, we've got some poor quality hay, and everybody knows probably the best thing to do is, I'm going to say it, is like, okay, we need to sort our feed that we're making in the summer months. I'm going to call it into three categories. And that was back in my medicine hat days, but a guy says, well, there's calf quality feed, and there's cow quality feed, and then there's what we call filler feed. Okay, so calf quality feed would be your early hay, the hay that you cut the earliest that has no rain on it. We're going to call that the calf quality feed, and I'm hoping you'll have that stuff wrapped up in July at the very latest. And then we're going to jump on to category 2, which we're going to call cow quality feed, and that can be all over the board and how people define it, but I still define it as hay that's been put up in good shape, maybe a little bit later, but it's still nice and green and it's good feed. And then the last one, which we would call the filler feed, would be the slew hay, the straw, any kind of opportunity feed that's available to us. And, you know, it fills the cow's belly, but it doesn't necessarily give the cows exactly what they're needing. So, and you know what, it's all a balance point, and it's pretty easy to decide based on nutrition, because you can probe your bales and you can pull feed samples, and you know what you've got in terms of your calf quality, your cow quality, and the filler stuff. And then you can throw the stuff together, utilize a nutritionist, feed company nutritionist, whatever, and they'll give you an idea or whichever, and you throw something together and you put it in front of the cows, and lo and behold, we hope it works, right? If we look at this picture here, well, if that was the cow's feed that I wanted her to eat and get pregnant, and this is what I was feeding her, that's a mismatch, right? That's not going to work. She's not going to get pregnant. Never mind, she's not even going to eat that because that's in the spring, and that's some of my straw that was left over from the bale grazing. So if that's what I'm giving her to survive, or I go, you know what? See that right there? She's got enough grass and she's got enough stockpiled grass. I can stop feeding her. And she's fine. She's going to get pregnant. She'll be fine, right? Because she's a good cow. My cows could live on snowballs and promises. Well, to a point. I want my cows to be tough, but at the same time, there's a line to how tough we can expect them to be. And the bottom line is when they start coming out open at a very, very high rate, they're trying to tell you something. Okay. That's when they're like, you know what? Pretty easy for me. I'm just not able to survive in this environment. So it's pretty easy. I'll raise your calf, but I'm just not going to get pregnant. So I can do two things. I can either leave your farm, or we can try to figure out a way to get along better in the environment that we're faced with, right? You got to remember that, because 2021 for us personally, now this is Popp Farms. We're still feeling the effects. We're coming out of it, but we're still feeling the effects. Okay, what's my next one? Oh, is there a bunch of mold on your feed? There's another interesting one, because that'll make your cows not want to be pregnant either. Okay, what do we have for pasture that's available to our cows in the summer months during the grazing season? And what are we going to provide to our cows? And the older I get, the more blunt I get to be, but it's like the best indicator of grazing management. This is me being blunt. If you drive around in the countryside in July or sometime in the summer months, and it's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and you see a bunch of cows along the road that are grazing, that's an indication of poor pasture, poor management. Okay, I don't need to see the grass. If those cows are grazing at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that's bad management. Okay, simple as that. I'm not going to explain why, other than to say that if the cow was in better management conditions, she should be laying down, ruminating, resting. And she should spend 7 to 8 hours or possibly 10 hours of the day grazing. The rest of the time, she should be lying down, resting if she has adequate pasture. So if she's up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, unless she went for a drink or something, but if she's out there like just grazing away, based on behavior, I can tell you what the pasture looks like. Okay, next one that we got to worry about is bull power. And so that's the next knee jerk. It's like, well, we had a poor reproductive rate. How many bulls are we running per cow? What shape are bulls in? Are we observing our cows? Our bulls get bred to the cows? Because I always like when we put the bulls out, I always like to see the bull breed 1 or 2 or 3, because they will do that when they first come off the trailer. They're pretty excited. You should be able to write down 5 or 6 tags in the first 10 minutes that you jump the bulls off. Hopefully, otherwise something is not right. When you turn the bulls out and your cows aren't cycling, something is wrong. There's a clue. Anyway, bulls jump off, write down 5 tags, come back 21 days later or in around that, because it can be anywhere from 21 to 23 days. With those tag numbers, go find those cows if you can. Okay, try to find them so that we know that it's happening. We know that they're getting pregnant. Next thing is the bull's testicular circumference can be influenced by elevated feeding of zinc by the breeder, the guy that's selling you the bull, but also if the bull has larger nuts or testicles or a larger testicular circumference, he will make heifers that are more fertile. Okay. And lo and behold, do relatively frequent breeding checks if we are thinking we're having issues with getting cows pregnant. Breeding checks. Not some bulls are pretty shy about breeding cows, some are not. But the bottom line is we want to see that happening, and we want to see it happen quite frequently in the first 20 to 30 days that the bulls are out there, and then we want to start seeing the odd bull laying around the pasture being lazy. If we don't see some of those things, but we still see the bulls milling around, then we know that there's an indication again that, hey, something might be going on here. Okay. Next thing, heat stress, and that's the thing. Like, everyone says to me, oh no, climate change isn't real. Every summer has been the same. Well, in the 25 years that we've lived in Erickson, which is a little blue dot on the map, it's supposed to be one of the coldest parts in the entire province. It's gotten way warmer. It's gotten way more humid in the summer months than many, many, many years that I lived on that place. There would be many summers where you might wear a t-shirt maybe 10 days where you're not dying, and that those days it's different. So there is more heat stress. We don't want to get into climate change, but we do see more of that, and more people have switched to putting their bulls out in July. And because we're breeding cows, there is some extreme heat associated with that. So be aware of that, because it's harder for those bulls to go out and get those cows pregnant. And the cow's probably not as excited about getting pregnant either on a day where it's plus 40, right? The next thing is going to be the quality and the quantity of water that we provide to our animals. And I listened to Cheryl's talk. I apologize. I missed the last session, but she had a picture of a bunch of cows standing in a dugout. And I just think in this day and age, when we know, and I know we can't do it for every single water source and every single whatever, but the bottom line is it's been my observation over the years, having an offsite water system. You can have a dugout there, and my cows will not go in the dugout, and I don't have to fence the dugout off. They do not want to drink the water that's in the dugout. They won't, you know. And I'm not saying that's the case every single time, but the bottom line is water quality is an issue. If we can create a better water source for our animals because we're pumping it, and yes, it's another solar system to maintain and everything else, and but the bottom line is it does contribute to the performance, and it will also contribute to reproduction. Okay, so. And I'm reminded of something because this morning I came downstairs and Adele says, "What's wrong?" I said, "I had a bad dream." She's like, what did you dream about? I said, "The cows got out." I'm like, of all things, right? All the cows busted out of the fence, and then there was another fence down, and then we ended up like with 30 people helping me in this dream, and everybody like they're wanting to help, but it's like, and then a bunch of guys came over the hill and they're chasing our cows around. It's like, this is the worst dream. Like, maybe I was having anxiety because I was giving this presentation. I don't know, but anyway, so we have lots of nightmares about some of this stuff. And then the next thing that I tell people is like, watch the behavior of your animals, and this again might be, I don't know, what that could be, a lot of things, like how much are the cows crowding, what are they doing, what are we seeing, what are we observing with regard to the bulls. Some guys will rotate their bulls. They'll put one group of bulls, instead of putting 6 bulls out, put out 3 bulls at a time. Leave those bulls in for, those 3 bulls get along, but they've got so much work. Leave them in there for 10 to 12 days. Pull those bulls out, put another set of bulls in. Understand your dominant and your subordinate bulls. Every farm that you go to, it's like, hey, you can come help me with semen testing, but let me bring the bulls into the chute. Right? How many times you've heard that? It's like, because that asshole doesn't get along with that asshole. And we as farmers know that. So if those two don't get along, maybe put them in 2 different breeding groups. Don't put those 2 bulls together. Or another one that I said is dominant versus subordinate bulls. You'll have this pretty old looking bully bull, and he's just the greatest ever, and he walks around the pasture all day long going, and all he does is push the young bulls off the cows. It's like, yeah, time to get rid of him. I don't care how pretty he is. Like if that's what his primary focus is, to dump another bull off the cows, then he's probably not one that you want, right? Because a good bull will cover 48 or 50 cows and a poor bull will cover 5. And we've seen that with the calves. It's like these are all from that bull. I know they are because I know what they look like. It's like there's a lot from that bull, right? And then it's like what happened to this new bull we got? Because you know what? I'm not seeing anything that looks anything remotely like what I think his cows might look like, and he pops 3 of them. So, other things to think about. I'm trying to make you not just think about, one thing, but there's so many things that can go wrong. The next thing I put is environmental stressors caused a change in water quality because we've had so much evapotranspiration over the course of the years with all the drought stress and everything else. Um, the water will change. The quality of the water will change. It becomes more concentrated. We're going to see we're going to see an elevation in sulfur, which ties up copper. We're also going to see an increase in total dissolved solids, or TDS. So test your water, right? And I put at the bottom offsite water, some more things to think about. Okay. So when I say now you're in a pickle, what my message is we're going to methodically and logically go through every problem that we see on the farm, and then we're going to see, okay, this can contribute, this can't contribute, this is logical, this is illogical. But the cows, that's why we have a calving book. And I had a good, this is a joke, I can't see anybody, but I know you guys are going to laugh at this one. This is a really good one. I got a really good friend. um, anyway, he says, you know what, like he's calving cows too, and he says, the best thing to do with your calving book, just rip out the first page, because that's when everything dies anyway. So don't even fill in the first page, it's useless. You may as well just rip it out of the book. So okay, you guys might think that's funny or not, but I thought it was awesome. So from ever since then, when I see now for you guys forever, when you start putting numbers on the first page of your calving book and stuff is dying and aborting and everything else, you will now remember that you are, because of what I told you, you can ignore the first page, you can rip it out, you don't have to write anything down because the first page does not count. Okay? So, all right. Whoopsie. No, that's not what I want to do. No. There we go. Okay, so what I've done here is I gave you guys an example of 3 different mineral tags, okay? And the first one on the far left is one that I've formulated with a feed company for a herd that I work with. And it's basically looking at, so we've got fiber, fat, calcium 14%, phosphorus 7%, so it's a 2-to-1 mineral. We're feeding salt with the mineral 8.3%, magnesium is 3.8, sulfur 0.2, iron 3715. Do we need that much iron? Probably not necessarily. You could probably get away with 2,500, but that's all right. Fluorine is a good thing. It makes the cows have really good teeth. No, that's actually not the reason that's in there. We put the copper up compared to some of the generic minerals. We put it at 3,300 milligrams per kg, the manganese 6660, the zinc 8280, and everyone's frantically writing. I'm like, I got to copy that tag. This is the mineral I need. No, the bottom line is I don't really care. You can copy this tag or any tag, because what's more important to the nutritionist is the one here that you see says the copper is at 3,000, and this one here says the copper is at 3,300. This one's 3,000. The manganese on this one is 6,000. This one is 6660. The zinc is 8280, and the zinc on this one is 8,000. So it's like, okay, so the one over here versus this one here, this one's only 200 parts per, or 200 milligrams per kg higher for some of these traces, copper, manganese, and zinc that we talk about, that we know is going to get cows pregnant. So you look at the tags, I'm like, how much is it per bag? Like, well, that one's 32 bucks a bag right here, and this one's 40 bucks a bag. Oh, that's easy. I want this one. Okay, I'm okay with you using this one if your cows are pregnant and they're running around your farm in the wintertime. And if you want to drive or cut intake, then we're going to use this guy over here, which trace mineralized salt, which look at the zinc on that one is 7,500. So we're driving zinc intake more with our TM salt that we're using. You don't need garlic in the winter. So why don't we just use this and a little bit of this, and that's good enough. Why would we need this? Well, you know what? This particular mineral, now if we talk about actual formulations, so let's talk about the 3,300 milligrams per kg of copper versus 3,000. That copper here is copper sulfate, okay? And it could be copper oxide as well. But if you look in bioavailability, you'd probably want to lean toward copper sulfate versus copper oxide. Copper oxide is a little cheaper to put in the mineral, but we could make it look better. We still got, for the tag, we have this amount of copper, but so this is, suffices to say, this is copper sulfate. In this mineral, we have the copper coming from 3 different sources, okay? So here, I'm using 2 forms of chelate. I'm using one called a Zinbro. I'm using another form of a chelated copper. So 2 different forms of copper. One's a metal amino chelate, and one is another form of chelation. And then on top of that, I'm using copper sulfate to get my levels. So my thought process here is I'm going to mix the methodology with which I deliver the copper to the animal. And a simple way of saying the purpose of chelating a mineral is simply to create an effective bypass or bypass rumen digestion, which we still need copper in the rumen in order for for the system to continue function, and we still get some of the copper in microbial protein when we provide it to the animal. The idea of using a chelate is to bypass rumen digestion, and also, the more important, to bypass if there's a high level of sulfur that can tie up copper and do some of the other thing. I am curious to find out what the trace mineral injections are worth, and I tried to research or find that information because that's something that Cheryl presented, but I didn't get a value on that. But that would be another thing that we could look at potentially doing on our problem groups. Okay, so we talked about problem groups that didn't get pregnant. So these are these ones here, the young or the nutritionally compromised. So those are animals that we could say, hey, you know what? We're going to take our first calf heifers and our second calf heifers, and those are going to be animals that maybe we're going to give a trace mineral injection to, but we're going to do that and we're going to write it down. We're only going to give it to half of them, and then we're going to see in the fall whether or not it had a positive impact. But don't just, like, what I'm trying to tell you is don't go whole hog wild. Like, it's the same old thing. It's like, well, the bull's got foot rot. Well, okay, what's the dosage on the bottle for liquamycin says? Well, he needs 62 cc's of liquamycin. I said, well, then give him that. Well, no, we're going to give him 80 because it's going to be better for him. No, don't do that. Minerals the same. Nutrition is the same. Don't give more. Just give what's needed. Find ways to administer it. Try to figure out the effect. It's a moving system, so you can't expect it to just react immediately and go, well, we've done this and the world is going to be solved. Our own cow herd is a classic example. Like, we solved our old cow problem, and I'm going to admittedly say we kept 5 of our open heifers last year. I'm like, they were young, and there was a logical explanation to why they were open. So we just decided, you know what, we're going to breed them again. So we bred them. I'm like, shame on me, terrible person that you are. I bred them. They're all pregnant. They all got pregnant on the first cycle. Well, we'll see. But that was their only strike ever in their life. If there's anything else that happens in their life that goes wrong, their numbers are written down, and they're written down on the board. And it's like, okay, if I ever see you again doing anything wrong, like a bad kid, until you're 12 years old, you're not going to stay around. So, but I'm guilty as charged, because it's like, we needed the cows, we still needed the reproductive rates. So that's the decision we made. Is it the best decision? Probably not. It just wasn't the best decision. But there was also some that I looked at. I'm like, no, you're no good. I don't like the way you're built. But those animals that we felt were good quality, there was nothing wrong with them structurally other than the fact that they were very thin when they calved. I knew that. It's like, okay, I'm going to do that. Okay, everyone else is like, well, you know what? Her calf died at 3 days old because the calf had a abomasal ulcer, so we're going to ship the cow. It's like, well, I don't know. I don't want to sound cruel, but that's not really her fault. Maybe we had a spare, maybe we didn't. Hopefully we had a spare. Maybe all our twins were born right at the start and we can graft one on. But I don't know. I sure wouldn't want Adele to ship me just because, um, a coyote's. I missed the coyote at 200 yards running wide open, right? You know. Anyway, it'd be a good reason maybe. Okay, so we're gonna pick on John a little bit more here, and then I'm coming to the end of what I wanted to present, and I'm hoping, Melissa, am I within the timeline of where I was supposed to be? That's what you wanted? You just give me a thumbs up. Okay, so it's awesome picking on your own cows, right? Cow on the left, typical example where thurls are slightly farther behind. She's an ancient old girl though, so forgive her. Okay, but you remember I told you about this shoulder thing that's happening here, right? So we see that right here. Her pelvis stayed relatively level, not perfect, stayed relatively level. I actually like her leg angles, but her thurls or her legs are just slightly too far behind hook to pin, and because of that, that's a causing factor to that. Was she an infertile little thing? Actually, she wasn't. She's like that cow in that picture, maybe she's had 10 or 11 calves. And what amazes me, I know lots of guys ship their cows. You know what? She's 10, she's going to go. What amazes me sometimes is, we keep our cows longer. We have some cows that are long in the tooth, but it's astounding, when we talk fertility, because this fall, we had some old cows and we had them marked down as leaving. And it's like, well, we got to have our peg test first. And then, there's 3 cows that were marked as you need to leave, right? Like, because they're coming up to the water bowl with one of those 4-legged things to get up to the water bowl because they're old, right? You run your arm in them, pregnant, like every year, those cows are pregnant. And it's like, and they come in the fall, it's like, hey, you know what? You're an old girl. You put your arm in her, she's like pregnant in the first cycle. It's like, okay, if she can be pregnant, she can be that old. What is she that this other one that's ripping around the pasture that isn't, right? Like what is it about her that makes her be or makes her pregnant? Okay, so that's why I say that. And other things that I observed during calving, it's like there's so much stuff to watch for and look for, right? So this cow here, what's she telling me? Well, she's not really telling me anything, she's just in the picture. So maybe there's the poop that tells me something, right? Maybe that's, that, oh, maybe I put the picture up because the cows cleaned up the bale grazing really good. Okay, but then I look at this picture over here, I look at this calf here, and I look at this cow, and I look at her cleanings, and I look what her cleanings look like, right? These are nice, clean cleanings. I've seen discolored, ugly looking, gross, rotten cleanings. We don't want those. Oh, the meeting is being recorded. I tried to get one more slide here, and then I'm going to end at that. Just see if I can find it. Maybe I can't. Nope, there she is. So this is my last picture for my presentation. No, I'm not going to show you. Oh, these are cows in Wyoming. That's a cow. That's a dairy cow in Wyoming that has had 14 calves, believe it or not. So yeah, she's a little ugly, but you know what? She's had 14 calves. Who cares? Okay, this is my last slide, and then you guys can ask all kinds of questions. And this to me is the model of what I call. I'm not going to call her a super cow, but she's pretty close to it in terms of how she's built and what she is. She was my son's 4-H calf. She was not a class winner, shocker, because she wasn't fat enough for the show or whichever, but that's just me being funny. But anyway, bottom line is this cow's tag is she was born in 2011, and she makes very big calves every year. She's a bigger frame cow. but she got pregnant every single year, and she looks good on our farm right now. So if she can do what she's doing and she's built like this, then why can't some of the other ones do what they're supposed to do? So there's a lot that I've covered. It may not seem like it, but every one of those little digits of points I could probably spend a day on if we were sitting in a truck driving through cows and looking at things. And sometimes you'll even go to a bull sale. This is going to be my last joke now, but I'd say sometimes, I say, you know what? You go to a bull sale, you pick out a bull. You really like the bull. He's thick, he's deep bodied. His mother is like a 10-year-old cow or 11-year-old cow, one of the most fertile cows. He wasn't the biggest weaning weight bull at the bull sale or whichever else. And you really like the bull. Like everything about him is right. And then you go in and you go to bid on him, and you end up buying the bull for $4,000, and you think you've done something wrong because everybody's going crazy over the other bull for 12 or 15 or $20,000. And the reality is you haven't done anything wrong. And when you buy a lot of your bulls and a lot of the sire choices that you make and the bulls that you're picking to make your cow herd, it's like, are you going to look at the bull's mother? And the next thing is, when you go to the farm or you're buying cows from someone, all of the thing that I always do is like, well, do you mind showing me your oldest cows? And then once you've seen the older cows, do you have any bulls from those old cows? Yeah, we got this one and this one. Okay, so just another little thing, and I don't care. Don't be ashamed if you bought the bull cheaper. Actually, be proud of yourself. If he comes out of an old cow, longevity is not the most heritable thing in breeding cattle, but longevity does manifest in certain structural things like this cow. So if this cow has a heifer calf on my farm, you think I would consider possibly keeping it? I might, unless it's got a terrible udder on it, but I'm definitely going to look at it because she's old. So, well, that's not your newest genetics. No, but those are the genetics that survive, that live on your farm, that thrive on your farm. Those are the genetics that you want. It doesn't matter. I mean, in dairy genetics, with all the work I've done for 25 years, I see it time and time again. Like, I could go back to bulls that are 15 years old and create more productive daughters from those bulls than I could on any modern stuff that's like, oh, look at this genomic thing. It's completely meaningless. That's just, it's not real. It doesn't, it's not proven yet. Okay. Proof is when the cow has 10 calves on your farm and gets pregnant in the first 21 days of the breeding season every year. When that cow is a heifer calf, you might want to consider keeping hers versus the one that calved at the end of the calving season. That's so, and those are all things, and those things, unfortunately, those things just, they do not happen overnight, right? So that's cows in Wyoming that I'll see in 2 weeks, but unfortunately, it doesn't happen overnight. And it's a consideration or a process that you have to go through in a lifetime to build a cow herd. But every cow will tell you something, and I can go to your farm, and chances are you're going to show me the cows that have lived, because the reality is the cows that live on your farm a long time, believe it or not, you actually know those cows. And a lot of times you don't know them, but the ones that really get long in the tooth, that get pregnant every year, you know those cows. But you never work with them during calving season. You never put their calf on them during calving season. You turn them out in the fall. It's like, oh, she's got a nice calf. She might not have the biggest one, but she always brings you a calf. And that's the cow that makes you money, not the cow that doesn't do all the other stuff. I don't care how pretty they are, right? So that's it.
So we did have a couple questions. So I'll start reading them from the chat, or Mary Jane and I will start reading them from the chat. And if you don't want to type them in the chat, if you use the old hunt and peck typing method like my husband, and you'd be much faster to speak, please then just go to the reactions at the bottom and raise your hand to let us know that you do have a question. and you can ask out loud. So the first question I see in the chat, well, first it was Charlotte lipping off about black cattle, but then
I
you
see
can.
that one. Shots fired. I hope he can see that. Uh,
So, how do you tell which type of chelation of copper you have in your mineral?
how do you tell which chelation you have? You have to ask your nutritionist or whatever source you're purchasing your mineral from, and feed companies are not obligated to share that information. They can tell you, well, we have chelated in there. But as far as the detail of the information, according to the Canadian feed regulations, the nutritionist is not forced to share that because literally he's sharing the secret to his recipe. Unfortunately, the rules are even worse in the United States. They don't have to tell you anything. They just write on there, it's this much. So what you can ask when it comes to the chelation question is you can ask, well, what are you using, a metal amino chelate? Are you using a polysaccharide chelate? You can ask what chelation they are using, and that'll be about it, unfortunately. Okay, what percent of your herd is older than 8-10? Realistic goal, 8 plus should be represent, I'm going to say 20% is a realistic goal.
John, can I ask a follow-up to that? Like, I remember years ago you giving a presentation and shocking everybody with the average number of calves that a cow has in the Canadian cow herd. And people were pretty shocked because I'm sure you said it's two. Like on average, when you could
No, no, you're thinking dairy.
well, I know it's two lactations for dairy, but I'm sure you said something like it was quite low in the beef herd. Four? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's a lot lower than if we count all the heifers and everything else, it's a lot
Yes.
lower than what we'd like it to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
In response, what you said about injectable mineral, that's great. Barb wrote that. That's awesome. So it's $1 per cc, and it's 1 cc per 100. So you're looking at about $5. That's very reasonable. Like I think that's a very reasonable cost to ensure on the younger animals that we're getting the adequate provision of mineral. I would be, especially if you're calving your first calvers separate from your cows, then that would be a way to do that, and that's really good input. So that's something that I would maybe recommend on half of them. In my own situation, we're probably going to inject all of our heifers just to provide that as an extra. What bull to cow ratio do you shoot for? That's a question from Charlotte to everyone, so that one's not for me. Or did everybody answer it already?
That is for you.
That's for me.
Yeah.
I would personally, I don't, for mature bulls, I don't have an issue with 32, 33 on this is a 3 or 4 year old bull. For younger bulls, no more than 20, and typically what we do with our heifer bulls, they just kind of get to come for fun. I don't count on them as being something. So on 100 head of cows, if I run a yearling bull, I'll run one of those and I'll run 3 mature bulls. And I'll make sure that the 3 bulls on those 100 cows are friends and not enemies.
While we wait for other questions to come in, I had a question on your opinion or thoughts on, I see maybe half of the late calvers, like I guess I would fall into that category with May, June calves, but I see a lot of people who keep the calves on the cow throughout the winter and then wean in like whatever, February, January. What are your thoughts on that? Like from my perspective, it's a high metabolic demand, but what are your thoughts on that?
Again, it's another situation of every farm has their own program and their own ideas of why they do what they do. Nutritionally speaking, the cost of keeping the calf on the cow is typically greater than having the cow away and feeding the two separately, because when we're separating them, the calves are getting the good, more expensive feed, and the cows are getting more maintenance feed. But then also, I would say, in argument for the other side, is the health typically will remain greater on the calves that will stay with their mothers for a longer period of time. They get hardened off, and I think mortality rates probably not as high as trying to wean some of those calves in the fall. So I think it depends on the size. Certainly when it comes to the effect of wind and a calf nursing on an udder, that does not contribute to the longevity of an udder, because there's a lot more wind chill. And anybody that's unthawed water bowls, which I'm hoping everybody on the presentation has, it's all right when you first go to thaw, but when you got to put the hand in the water and pull it back out on the metal, that gets cold. And that's the same as a calf nursing. But I'm not opposed to any way that anyone does it. Not as much anymore. I mean, you again, you have to have a reason why you do it the way you do it. Um, we talk a lot about compensatory gain, and it's a discussion I got into quite a bit with Gerald and Charlotte too. And they wean their calves, and I'm like, you know what, feed them. It's like, well, what about the compensatory gain? I'm like, well, once the gain is on the calf, the gain is there. And if the calves are in good shape through the cold winter because they're getting adequate energy, then that's just so much better. The most important thing, whether calf left on, calf away from cow, or whichever that we talk about, is the one thing that's extremely important to remember when you're feeding calves or you're feeding a young animal, 400 pounds. It's called a prolonged period of negative energy balance. So some guys are like, "Oh, we just feed them hay all winter." Well, that actually doesn't work, because that growing calf needs more than hay. It needs energy. And if you're feeding hay and it's -30 and the wind is blowing and you're not providing any grain to those calves because my cows are tougher than yours, you're putting the calf into what's called a prolonged negative energy balance. And if that period exceeds 20 days, you've stunted it for life. Okay. And probably nobody has ever seen calves that are stunted, but some guys call them the runty one or whatever, or it's going to pass away. But that's an indication either she's milk starved for her mother or something is going on. They usually have a very big head. They got a potty looking belly, and they look like there's just not a whole lot of hope. But those calves are typically calves that are either genetically inferior or they've just simply experienced a long period of negative energy balance. So anybody wants to ask what our preg rate was in 2021, we almost hit 20% open. Wasn't quite as bad, or the fall of 22 wasn't quite as bad as that, but when you've had good preg tests and that happens, it makes your eyes go really big, and then you're like, what? Even had 2 different vets check them. I'm like, this can't be. It's like, no. Adele just said it can't be. My wife, she says it can't be. We'll just get a second opinion. So, but you know what? It was. So, and all we can do is try to learn from it. Thank goodness the cattle prices went up, because if they were still what they were in 2021, I don't know. It's pretty hard to make the numbers work, right? Like, it's not an easy thing. And I mean, right now we have better prices. So we got to figure out how to do things right, because we're going to have prices that aren't going to be as good as what they are now.
John, we had another question where they had done liver samples.
Yep.
And the copper was a good level, but the selenium was high. And so how long to get that level back down on the selenium, back to normal, where last summer they could not get enough mineral to the herd to satisfy them? So that sounds like they were maybe really eating through the mineral quickly.
Okay,
so how I would interpret that, but feel free to jump in if I misunderstood the question.
If the selenium levels are high, apparently high, then, you know, the first point is selenium. Selenium does not interact negatively with copper. If there's added selenium in the mineral, then that needs to be taken out of the formulation completely. And I would tackle if there is any potential lack or problem, I would tackle the selenium question through vitamin E. As far as mineral consumption, the bottom line is the cow requires, as an average calculation for the mineral that I showed, or some of the minerals that I showed, an average calculation is 3 bags a week for 100 cows. If they go to 4 bags a week for 100 cows, for all the years we've done it, I mean, unless you're having huge reproductive problems, and if you are, we can, you know, probably best if you just give me a shout and we can talk about it. If that's the case, they don't need any more. So then what I would do in my situation when my cows are eating in excess of that amount of mineral, and they're like mineral pigs, then typically what we do is we would cut that mineral with salt in order to regulate the intake. So they're going to get 3 bags. So that's sitting on the Can-Am or whatever. For that group of 100 cows, we're going to get 3 bags a week. Well, if they eat it in 3 days, then the rest of the week we're just going to get salt, because that's all we need. And it's, I don't know how many people eat a multi-mineral or a multivitamin pill every day or not, but the bottom line is we need so much, we don't need any more than that. And I mean, the form is a critical aspect as well, but selenium is not something that would cause a negative effect on copper intake. I don't know if that helps or not, but that's probably one that requires more depth, and I'm available by phone anytime.
I'm wondering perhaps if maybe could we unmute that participant? I wonder if he was meaning like because selenium has such a small window of toxicity, he's worried about like toxicity. So just I don't know if he was thinking the interplay between copper and selenium so much as the window of toxicity, but I'll let maybe Larry speak to that.
Yeah, ours was we had over 35% open this year. We didn't have that issue before. I was wondering if maybe the selenium was in the drought-stricken grass, because there's only so much selenium released each year. If the cows are eating the same amount of grass with less volume, they're getting a higher concentration. So by using commercial minerals, were we getting too much? Something was tying up something somewhere is what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, but like, okay, so you're seeing elevated levels of selenium, but selenium wouldn't have tied up some of the other traces. It could cause, like, the toxicity levels could potentially cause a depression in reproductive rates. But I would really, the other thing is, what was your situation as far as water quality and water availability for the cows? Or was the water top notch?
There was 4 different water sources. They were the breed up was affected on all the pastures the same. There were some that had water from wells, and other ones had water from pumped out of dugouts. Other ones drank from a dugout, and all were the same.
And you tested the water?
Yes.
And
2 of them we have, yes.
And no high total dissolved solids?
No.
Oh boy. See, that's, I mean, and that's the, you know, I come at you with a generic thing like that one. Honestly, Larry, I'd have to see all the numbers to be able to really truly address it. I'm not going to say that selenium alone is responsible for what's going on. There's got to be some other stuff going on. Cow body condition everything else was perfect. Same as always.
It was good. Yes, there's those that I expected to be open, some late calvers, but no. And the breed up was only in the early cows were bred on time. The late cows never bred. Like there was no those cows that didn't breed early, didn't get caught, never did breed all through the season. Because there was a couple younger bulls left in. We rotated bulls through the season. So every cow was exposed to 3 different bulls during the first 3 cycles. And then we just left the young bulls with the cows at the end because we don't identify them and we could just actually pull them out of the way afterwards. But we never even had that.
So the bulls ran with the cows even for cleanup, you would have got well over 3 cycles.
Right. And there was no breed up anything past the second cycle.
And no age stratification. It was just like not 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. It's just everybody.
Just a gate run. Every second one come out, you could just pull them out. Every second or third.
That's a tough one. I would have to see a lot more numbers to be able to comment, to be honest with you. Like, you got me. I don't know how to answer that one.
Yeah.
Question, well, maybe just a comment here about we had a lot more opens this year too, and that was just such a prevalent thing I heard across the board in talking with people. But the heat and the flies were horrible in July, so particularly in those folks that had bulls out in July. Yeah, that was our experience as well. We had 16% open and our bulls go out the last week of July. And the flies were unbelievable this year.
Yeah, like, I mean, it bottom line is when you run the diagnostics, like, you have to look at, look at a group of 100 cows. Okay, was it middle, old? Like, there's usually some kind of pattern from what the last question. I don't think there's any pattern. Like, there's 0 pattern. Nothing points to a specific group of animals. So those ones, that's literally the worst thing to try and figure out. But usually there's some form of a trend. Like, we didn't have like early calv, like, it literally was our later calvers and our first calvers this year that still had problems with repro. Everybody else was back to normal. And it was hot and there was flies, but we've had other summers where it was hot and we had flies, right? It's just the one thing that I will say is, like, that I found so strange. It's like, usually think, well, I can fix it from one year to the next. We'll add some more bull power. We'll do this. We'll do that. And then the next year, it's like we fixed it some, but we didn't fix it overnight. It seems to take a number of years to do it, which is the ugly part.
Yeah. I think this all also really points to keeping like accurate records. Like, it doesn't have to be overwhelming or cumbersome, but yeah, like, you don't know if you have a trend unless you're keeping records, like you say, right? So check those ones, the first 5 or 10 that the bull jumped off the trailer and bred, and you're able to record that and go and check those cows again. And
it's just, it's just little things. Like, it's, as much as I used to always say, well, you know what, the calving book is not that useful, but you know what, when you have these issues and you mark down, and I don't care if you you don't have to weigh your calves, you just write small, medium, or large.
Yeah.
Right. Any kind of information that you required that day. If the calf was big, then it's written down. And you just write L for the calf, the size of it. She had a bull calf that was big. So then at least when you dig back, it takes a little bit of digging, but if we don't have the calving book, we got nothing, So it's even worse when Adele takes the calving book away and she hides it somewhere. I'm like, where's the calving book? Oh,
runs it through the washing machine.
Okay. No.
Classic farm wife move.
No, she would never do that. She actually puts them in the computer. So, but
no, that's awesome. Mary Jane, awesome. Here a link on more information on taking body condition scores, because it is not subjective. It's objective. It's not a 2.5 in your herd is a 2.5 because that's the middle of your herd. A 2.5 is a 2.5, right? People get kind of barn blind or used to your own cows. Sometimes it's nice to just if you're not easily offended, if you have someone that you can trust their opinion, bring them out and have them say, like, no, your cows are maybe a bit thin or whatever. I would say like that objectively is a 1.5, not a 2.5. You know, it's a good way to get some fresh eyes because we just get used to seeing our own animals over and over, right?
Yeah, and I like that one I firmly agree with. And even like with some of the nutrition work that I do, is I just tell guys, I said, you know what? I said, you only see me once every 6 months, but I'll come and look at your cows. Let me see the cows. And if I'm there every day, like you don't see the calves grow, but the bottom line is, you know, if I see something, it's like, yeah, they're not looking good, but you know, it's just another set of eyes. If you're not offended by somebody else's eyes, like I mean, it's no skin off my back. If you tell me my cows are thin, it's like, well, okay, they are, right, or they're not. But unfortunately, when we have reproductive problems, we've got to keep more records. As soon as I get off the phone, I'm going to be on my computer researching selenium and trying to figure out what's going on there. But yeah, it's a tough thing, and when you're trying to figure it out, you know, there is a billion things that, and I've touched it on a lot of them, and often don't think it's as complicated as what we think, right? It's just sometimes the answer is right in front of you.
Yeah.
Not always, but sometimes it is, right?
Well, and it's a gut punch to have 30% open, and it's overwhelming to think of like, how am I going to tackle this or figure out what the cause was. But I really appreciate in your presentation the way you systematically broke it down to the different factors that affect fertility and how you can just logically go through them, look for patterns if you've got records. Because sometimes I think your knee jerk is to like change everything at once. And then, okay, the problem's fixed in a year or two, but you don't know what the actual thing was that fixed it. And you're spending a lot of money on maybe it was one thing that fixed it, but you're spending money on 5 other things along with it.
Right.
You know,
in our situation, like I've still got my first my coming to, so getting pregnant for their second calf, we're still struggling. So what we're going to do now this year is we're going to take our heifers, we're going to put them on better nutrition, and they're going to be on better nutrition pre-calving, and they're going to calve on their own like back in the day we were supposed to do, but we just went away from it. But we'll calve the heifers separately, and we'll invest more money in them, and we'll give them a trace mineralized injection, because those are the ones that want to come open in the fall. So we're just going to be nicer to them. And then we'll see, you know, if they don't get pregnant again, then it's like, okay, now what, right? Because the other thing is, for years and years, like there was, if you remember back to Wilt Bank et al. 1962, the man with the golden standard, a heifer needs to be 65% of its mature body weight in order to become a cow. Well, that was in 1965. So then there was a researcher in Nebraska that started doing work, and he says, no, we can have our heifers be 55% of their mature body weight, and we can calve them, and they can be reproductively sound, and they can do everything that they're supposed to, being 55% of their mature body weight at their first calf. So you're calving heifers at 800 pounds. Okay. We did that for almost 10 years. I followed that Nebraska study, and I love the idea of it because those cows mature later in life, and they don't actually hit their mature weight until they're 5 years old, where they actually weigh their 1,450 pounds that they're going to get to. But from year 2 to year 5, they're growing slowly. But genetically, they're able to produce a steer for you that finishes at 1,300 pounds, just like the heavier cow. So each year that you do that over the course of 5 years, you're feeding 100 pounds less cow weight for maintenance based on the Nebraska study. So guess what? I did it, and we did that for successfully for almost 12 years. We did that successfully.
is that the
For the last
restricted
12
gain
years.
heifer studies? Is that one or no?
Yeah, that's the one
Yeah.
that study was duplicated at Western College of Veterinary Medicine
Yeah.
with Bart Lardner. He did the same study, and he showed the same results as the Nebraska study. And I mean, that
Oh,
was one thing
interesting.
that we did, and it worked, and it was awesome. And I'm like, this was a piece of research that we applied on our farm. It was really, really good. And then 2021, fall of 2021 drought came, fall of 22, terrible preg test. There you go. So now it's like, okay, so what's my problem, right? Too much simmental influence on my calves? Did I get too much frame creep? Where are the issues why these animals aren't getting pregnant? So I've got to try and sift through it. And, you know, and then from there I get my answer.
John, when you
Maybe it's-
mentioned, sorry, when you mentioned the 55% in the yearling heifers being bred, how would you, I guess, what's your opinion comparing that to letting the heifers develop longer before breeding? So letting them develop slowly for 2 years and then exposing them to a bull as 2-year-olds for calving when they're 3. So letting them have that slower development before,
It's a great idea, but it's too expensive.
yeah.
It's simply too much money. I mean, it's, you know, it unfortunately it comes at a great cost. It's like those open heifers that I chose to send back into the cow herd for another go. It's like, realistically, I shouldn't be doing that. I chose to do it, but it's, you know, it's almost like a BSE crutch where the cows are worthless. It's like, well, we'll just keep the bulls out longer because at least if they're pregnant, they're going to do something. But it's not biologically, genetically, we have animals that are able to do those things, and they're able to perform under a system where they calve at 24 months of age. I have heard, or I know people that are spring and fall calving, and I think there's a situation where you can have your heifer to have her first calf. She can enter the, you know, she can calve in at 26 months. Then I think it's great. And that's where I agree with you. But if you're wanting to have calves once a year, then that's, and to delay them for an entire year. There's a lot of other things that can go wrong in the process of doing, meaning we have way too many cycles that are fertile prior to breeding, if it's a fertile animal, because the most fertile heat on an animal is the second, the third, and the fourth heat. But the third heat postpartum is literally the most fertile heat. So, and this would be something again that we need to watch for, that we talked about, is when are we seeing the postpartum heats starting to occur? And that's one thing that I will say for our situation. I remember the summer of 2021, usually when we put bulls out, the day we put bulls out, it's like we've got psychopath behavior as far as cows riding each other. And I do remember that in the summer of 22, it's like, it's not really seeing it, right? Because a lot of those cows and a lot of those drought cows and a lot of those cows that were suffering from stress were not showing heats. They didn't have one good heat before the bulls went out. They didn't. A lot of those drought cows don't, and they're not as fertile. First heats are not as fertile. Another thing that very possibly could be happening for Larry's situation, and that's something that I want to maybe look at, is what is the role of selenium with respect to early embryonic mortality? Because I think another thing that we're seeing as a result of heat stress, extreme heat, this is again my opinion because it happens a lot in the dairy industry, is we're seeing, like, when the cows have extreme heat stress in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and I do a lot of work in those states, cows don't get pregnant, and there's a lot of EETs, like a lot of early embryonic mortalities and heat stress. And then all of those cows typically start coming into heat in September, October, which, you know, those are the most fertile months for dairy breeding. But that is another thing that could be happening with a lot of these cows that are coming in as open, is they're getting pregnant reproductively, and then with extreme heats, some of those cows are just pushing the embryos out because of heat stress, which would be, I mean, it's very common to see early embryonic mortality with respect to heat stress or some form of imbalance. That's a possibility, which that points more to a herd that has every age group of cows, where we see opens with no rhyme or reason, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, all at the same percentage open. Which, you know, in our situation, we've got coming threes. So it's pretty obvious. That is the animal that requires NEM, net energy for maintenance, net energy for gain, and net energy for lactation. I'm shortchanging her probably on net energy for gain. Therefore, she's like, well, you know what? I'm going to be open. Right? But I don't know that yet. I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm a good candidate. I can pick on myself.
Hey, John, can I ask a follow-up question to that? Whoever asked the 3-year, keeping them to 3 years old. What I've kind of always been suspicious about, and you tell me your opinion because you always do. Does that sort of favor the ones that are less fertile too? I am kind of not a fan of that because I think you're hiding something. Like it's sort of lumping everybody together and not setting out the ones that are most fertile because they come into heat quicker. Am I off base with that or no?
You're not off base. I mean, you're definitely not off base. Like it's reproductive selection. I mean, ultimately, reproductive selection should be relatively ruthless early in life, and then it should never have to happen after that. So, having said that, depends on how we raise that animal and how we grow her, Charlotte. Like if we're growing the heifer to reach a higher weight and we're more aggressively targeting a certain weight with respect to puberty and it's happening, then it's great. Having said that, like in Europe, with a lot of the dairy breed that I work with, what they do is they actually calve the heifers in at 26 to 27 months of age. But the reason they do it, because those cattle are on pasture in the summer months, and where they're on pasture, they're basically paid by the state to sheep the pasture, so they have nothing to eat. So they have a very slow growth rate. So it has to relate to the growth rate of the heifer that you're raising. If you're raising her at a very slow rate, then I think it's okay to breed her at a later age, and she will have a longer productive life. But if you're feeding her to be a big girl, then it's not okay to breed them for a later calving date. So the growth rate is crucial. I wouldn't want, if I'm breeding the heifers to calve in at 28 months of age, I would not want those heifers gaining any more than 1.4 pounds a day post weaning.
I think moreover, there's also the like marketability of culls, right? Like a open heifer that's a yearling is a lot more marketable. You have more options than a 3-year-old that's open, right? Like she's just not, and you've got more sunken.
And I mean the heifer, let's say the heifer has a calf. If the heifer has a calf, she's quite a marketable animal still. But if we choose to do what I did and we send her back to the herd, then we've reduced her value significantly, right? But when she's young, she can still be a heiferette. At least there's some value. It's not the greatest value, but there's still some value there. I mean, an open heifer is not costly. But if you're having a reproductive disaster, chances are, if you've got 20 or 30% open, you're not going to have a deep enough heifer pen to replace your cows with good quality heifers. So then you continue to culminate and perpetuate your problem because you're going to start introducing marginal quality heifers from within. I don't know if that.
John, can I ask that again in a slightly different way? So is it, if I'm hearing you right, it's matching your development program to your breeding approach? Because I guess if you're pushing, like air quotes, pushing them harder, having them at a higher percentage of their mature body weight so that they're not trying to grow and raise a calf and get back into rebreed, if you're not giving them the nutrition to help them get there, so like as you mentioned, be nice to them, does that, I guess, how do you balance your approach to developing to them to your expectation of when you're breeding them and as a percentage of mature body weight? Does that kind of reframe it a little bit there?
I think it does. And I mean, I think it's so much of that question is individual it's an individual herd thing, and it's what works and what all of a sudden doesn't work. As I mentioned, we got away with doing our heifers the way we did to breed them at 55% of mature body weight, and we got away with that system for quite a number of years. And then all of a sudden a drought came along, which I didn't account for in my thought process, and everything changed, and it changed drastically. So in retrospect, how do I react to that? Well, if I would have known it would have had that kind of a reproductive effect on my heifers, the first calvers, then I would have done something differently with them. But you don't know that until you do your preg test. So I'm not sure if that answers it specifically, but a lot of times a mistake that we make in management, we are unable to fix it. Like the problem with a cow herd is it's a dynamic thing that flows over years and years and years, right? Some of you guys know my wife very well, some of you don't, but Adele had, I mean, we went through a bout of cancer with her in 2019. So we said, well, you know what, we're going to reduce the cow herd. And I talked to a really good friend of mine and said, hey, we're going to cut back on cows. And we talked about it and we said, you know what, just don't breed heifers for 1 year. That's what I did. I didn't breed heifers for 1 year. And if there's anybody listening to this, don't do that. Because you know what? It's absolutely mind-blowing how hard an effect that has on a cow herd and how quickly that falls through a cow herd when you choose not to breed heifers 1 year. You want to be out of cows, don't breed heifers for 4 years, you ain't gonna have a cow left on the place. It's unreal how that works its way through a cow herd. So, you know, you make a decision on one dynamic and it affects so many things. So because a cow herd is a continuum over time, we unfortunately can't look at it, as hard as it is, we can't look at it as one single year. We have to look at it over a span of 4 years. And then we have to try and change and accept the fact that we have to make gradual changes. It's more acceptable for most guys here. I know a lot of guys will be good grass guys. We all know that if we hammer a pasture hard 1 year, I mean, thank goodness we don't live in southern Alberta. It's way worse there. Mark, good. But the bottom line is when you make a mistake in your grazing or you graze late into the fall, you pay for it the next year. And if you don't get rain, you're going to pay for that decision for 2 years. And this is literally the same thing. Like we make mistakes in how we manage our grasses. We reap what we sow. Like it's a system that responds, even though we say it's dormant in the winter and it's asleep and there's snow on it. It's a system that continually changes with the things that we do to it. If we overgraze a pasture 1 year, you come back to it the next year, how come there's no grass here? It's like, oh, right, I hammered that piece, right? And if you hammer that piece over and over and over, and it's like, well, it's still producing. And 1 year, and it doesn't happen right away, it takes 7 years of really hammering a piece. And after 7 years, you've done it. You have cooked it. But it takes 7 years to destroy it. And I hate saying it, but I think a functional cow herd is the same thing. Like they have a tolerance, and every herd is different. You know, it just is. And I can't walk onto one cow herd and say, you know what, this is what I see, or this is what I don't see. All I can do is go and see the cows with you and go, okay, we need to, you know, I think you should work on this. And that's it. I mean, all you're going to hear me always say is your cows have to be pear-shaped. If your cows are not pear-shaped, they're not going to stay around. It's that, and that I've learned that 50 years of being around the things. It's like, if they're shaped like a sausage, they work really good on a high grain diet, and that's it. So
Any other comments or questions from the audience?
I would ask another one. I'm
Go
just
ahead.
hogging you to myself, John. I don't feel like I get enough time with you. I would ask about the when you drive around and you see the cows grazing in the middle of the afternoon when they should be ruminating. What are your thoughts on these really frequent moves, whether it's 6-hour moves or whether it's daily moves or whatever, where you're kind of disrupting normal animal behavior? How much of an impact do you think that actually has on like fertility rates? I know we've backed off on the frequency of our moves, partly because of that, partly because you can call us lazy. But yeah, just curious your take.
Okay, this depends on the class of animal. I think if you're doing it with feeder cattle that you want eating more, you want to try to increase the excitement or with regard to the behavior. I think more frequent moves are okay. You got to remember, I'm 55 years old, so I've started going to Mexico more. So you're probably not going to see me move a wire every 3 hours. Having said that, I don't feel there's a benefit in terms of the disruption. I think once a day is fine. As far as cows go, I personally feel the more that we disrupt a cow's behavior, that I don't think it's a great thing. I mean, I think they're excited to get new feet, but we have an old cat at home, and it doesn't matter whether you give her food or not. She just meows at us all the time. It's like, feed me. So that's just that's a conditioned response. For anyone that grazes rotational, whether you move your cows every 3 days or every 5 days, every time they see you, they want to move, right? I mean, maybe yours are different than ours. And in the fall, usually Adele usually just takes the car to go check them, so that they don't know that we're checking them, so they don't know that maybe they could possibly move. But every time that disruption occurs, it does result in disappointment, therefore a reduction in intake. It's just activity that's kind of senseless and useless. So I'm not an Alan Savory. I'm not an Alan Savory guy. I'm not a highly intensive fowl to pasture, put 1,000 units per acre. I'm sure it has its place, but I'm not necessarily convinced by it. The most important thing, in my opinion, when it comes to managing grass, is try to keep your nutrition even, meaning what the cow eats over the course of a rotational grazing period in the first rotation should be relatively similar, which means we should move our cows more frequently in the first rotation so that they're consuming the top 1/3 of the plant material. And yeah, there's days where it happens, and happens to me, it happens to everyone. It's like, oh, I think they got another day, and you come back the next day, it's like, dang it, I should have moved them the day before. But probably never happens on your guys' place. But anyway, when it does, it's like, you know what, it is what it is. But the bottom line principle is we want to try to keep the nutrition even. So if we're, some guys are management intensive alfalfa grazing, and it's like, well, we're going to make them eat the highly soluble protein stem top plant material, and we're going to get the rumen used to that. And then within a course of 12 hours, we're going to make them eat all the stem material. So they're going to consume the whole plant. And the next day we're going to do that again, and we're going to do that again. Well, there's a lot of variation and gradient in the nutrition and what we're asking the rumen to do. And I think less turmoil is better.